Hello and welcome to the Happy Picking Podcast, where today we are going to delve into the history and mystery of Cripple Creek. We're going to take a look at where this classic tune actually comes from and how it became the bluegrass and banjo standard that we know it as today. And we're going to clear up some of the misinformation about the song too. So, if this sounds like your sort of thing, then pull up a chair, hit the follow button, and let's take a look at the history and mystery of Cripple Creek. So, if you've ever picked up a banjo, the chances are that one of the very first tunes you learned was Cripple Creek. And it's quite possible that you learnt this as an Earl Scruggs tune, or you learnt it as one of your first Scruggs-style bluegrass banjo tunes. But what if I was to tell you that Cripple Creek isn't actually an Earl Scruggs song, and that the history of this dates back some 150 or more years? So where did this come from, and how did it become the massive bluegrass and banjo standard that we know it as today? To look into this, we are going to have to look at the history of Cripple Creek, and let's see if we can settle some points in a bit of a timeline for us. And let's start with the man himself. So, Earl Scruggs recorded the traditional instrumental of Cripple Creek for the first time in the studio on August the 11th, 1960. And this seminal version was featured on the landmark album Foggy Mountain Banjo, which was released by Lester Flatt and Earl Scruggs and the Foggy Mountain Boys. And that album, if you don't know, is really regarded as a sort of gold standard of the Scruggs and bluegrass albums of that time. And it will have a load of the songs on that you will probably be playing today with maybe not knowing about the origins or their origins in that style. The name of the album gives it away a little bit with Foggy Mountain Banjo. But there's other tunes on there like Reuben as well, where you can really listen to and get the idea of where this came from. But while August 1960 marks the first official studio recording of Cripple Creek by Earl Scruggs, his unique Scruggs-style banjo picking version of the song was already well known in live performances, and he'd famously played it on stage with the likes of Bill Monroe and his Bluegrass Boys as early as 1947 and 48. However, if you want to find some of the earliest versions of Cripple Creek, you can actually look away from the banjo to the early African-American blues movement. And this is where there's a complete bit of sort of mystery of the song that we may not have known. And it was actually on the 20th of August in 1924, the first commercial recording of the song Cripple Creek was recorded, or the first thought commercial recording. And it was recorded by an African-American musician called Sam Jones. And Jones recorded a medley that was titled Cripple Creek and Sourwood Mountain. And this was for Columbia Records, and it was whilst he was performing as Stovepipe No. 1, a sort of one-man band show. The recording itself was issued on a 78 RPM shellac disc for Columbia, and it featured Jones on vocals, harmonica, and guitar. And Sam Jones sang the melody and played it on harmonica whilst backing up on guitar. But what's also cool and kind of hard for us to comprehend today is that he also played and recorded the melody on kazoo. You can hear this if you check out the recording, and I will put a link to the tune in the description if you're on Spotify. And even though this sounds like a bit of a novel thing to us if we're unaware, at the time, using a kazoo really wasn't a novel thing on these sort of recordings. It It was actually used a lot in the early African American country blues records. If you haven't heard any of the early records this way, there's a banjo player called Gus Cannon, and he was around in this sort of jug band era in the 1920s. And you can hear Gus Cannon and the band he's in, and again, there's a kazoo that takes the lead proportions of songs from time to time as well. But that story's for another time, so check those out if you fancy the 1920s jug band music. So, bringing this back to Cripple Creek, in a pretty cool twist, right? So, the Sam Jones recording was on August the 20th, 1924. But that was the first commercial recording of Cripple Creek. Prior to this, the string band musician sort of family of Fiddling Cow and Powers made a recording of the tune on August the 19th, 1924. So the day before the Jones version. But this one was not commercially issued at that time. And the Fiddling Powers and family were a pioneering Virginia string band from Russell County, and they were led by their patriarch James Cowan Powers, who played the fiddle, violin. And the group featured his children, Charlie on the banjo and the fiddle, Orpha on the mandolin, and Carrie on guitar, and Ada on ukulele and the auto harp. And their sort of energetic old-time music approach really helped establish the sort of early country music around that time. And the recordings themselves are full of noise, and you can really picture yourself in these studios with everyone around at that one point. So we have two distinct releases here of Cripple Creek. One by a family fiddle band from Virginia, and the other by an African-American blues musician, and that both in the August of 1920. And let me remind you that Earl Scruggs was born on the 6th of January 1924, so he was only 4 at the time, and it was still 36 years away from recording the marquee album of Foggy Mountain Banjo. So that can really be the place that sort of starts to put it in position of taking a look behind Cripple Creek as we know it on the banjo and seeing the history of the song and where it originated from. So looking deeper into the origins of the song, well, as with most traditional American folk songs, these tunes were learned by musicians who then travelled around and they passed the songs to each other, generally learning by ear or picking songs up from a town or a state or a county nearby that was popularised there by the local bands playing. And various versions of songs came up. And you can kind of see with these bits of history that there's many different ones that are thought to be an origin. And sometimes we just don't know. Now, for Cripple Creek, it's thought that this dates back as a melody to the 19th century as a traditional Appalachian folk song. And the song's earliest documented appearance in print consists of lyrical fragments that were collected from white singers in East Tennessee and South Carolina. And these can be found published in the Journal of American Folklore from 1915. And this includes some of the lines for Cripple Creek, such as, going to Cripple Creek, going to Rome, going to Cripple Creek, going back home. And these lyrics are from way before 1915, though, with some documented in 1909, and the melody thought to be predating even further back. We want to explore and try and find the origin of Cripple Creek. We now again have to delve even further back and consider the history and the world at the time. And our journey is going to take us back to America in the early 1950s. And actually as early as 1948, where there was a great gold rush as prospecting and frontiersmanship drove out to the people to the newer towns and to go to the newer built cities and seek their fortunes, and to the unknown fronts and make their fortunes in the mining areas in California and Colorado. It's the Colorado gold rush that's of interest to us here. The primary Colorado gold rush, originally called the Pikes Peak Gold Rush, began in July 1858, and it peaked in 1859, and the boom drew over 100,000 prospectors to the region. But a secondary massive gold strike later occurred in the Cripple Creek district, beginning in 1891. So, can you see where we're going here? And now, if we take a look at the lyrical version of Cripple Creek, this is what we get.
Going up to Cripple Creek, I'm going on a run. Going up to Cripple Creek to have a little fun. Going up to Cripple Creek, I'm going on a whirl. Going up to Cripple Creek to see my girl. I got a gal at the head of the creek. I'm going up to see her by the middle of the week. Kiss her on the mouth, just as sweet as any wine. Wraps herself around me like a sweet potato vine.
And I'll just read them out to you now. We've got going up to Cripple Creek, going on a run, going up to Cripple Creek to have a little fun, going up to Cripple Creek, going on a whirl, going up to Cripple Creek to see my girl. I got a gal at the head of the creek, going up to see her about the middle of the week. Kiss her on the mouth just as sweet as any wine, wraps herself around me like a sweet potato vine. And these lyrics are thought to portray the hardship, resilience, toil and work of the mining towns in a fanciful and joyous way, and as a bit of a sort of release against the hard nature of the work that they were having. And it's the thoughts of seeing my girl at the end of it to try and levy a bit of joy into this real hard life. So, we believe Cripple Creek to be referring to the mining district in Colorado. So that seems to be the history of maybe where the topic of it came around. But where did the title Cripple Creek come from? Well, there's a further tale that states that Cripple Creek got its name from some local cattle drivers, some herders who grazed livestock in the area before the gold rush. And the legend states that the name was coined when a frightened calf jumped over a fence, it landed in a gully, and it broke its leg. And that's where the term Cripple Creek seems to be coming from. That gave the Colorado mining area the name. And when we look at the lyrics, we can start to build this modern understanding about where the history of the song developed into the tune we start to know it as today. Another thought is that the town Cripple Creek took its name just from the Cripple Creek in Virginia. And the fanciful lyrics and the idea of the town is just actually people moving west and starting this new life and keeping that sort of original homestead thought with them. So let's bring this back around to the banjo. The origins of the song date back from around the 1800s as a melody. There is history and thought of that this has been passed around from territory to territory from back then. And in 1891 was the Cripple Creek Gold Rush. And we have evidence of the lyrics from the early 1900s. We can then jump forward to the bluegrass version that we know today. And bluegrass originated around the 1940s, and there's no documentation about Earl Scruggs playing this song with Bill Monroe in the 40s. But the earliest recording is from 1960 of the version on the banjo as we know it today. So since 1960, this old-time traditional tune has been our staple and gold standard of bluegrass banjo, and it's a rite of passage for all those pickers. So that's over 65 years just in the way that we know it today without thinking of the earlier history. So why is it so important and such an essential song for us to learn? Well, for me as a teacher, it's really about where it falls in the history and the growth of bluegrass banjo. And it's also about the man that popularized this for us. And when we think of Earl Scruggs, we think of that blistering Tommy gun style picking and level of complexity. And when you start to play the banjo, this is something that's pretty difficult to figure out. And we always get exposed to that crazy fast sort of getaway music on the banjo. And we don't always get the chance to explore sort of melodic and slower rhythms of picking when we're looking into bluegrass. And that's where the banjo suffers a little bit. And if you offer that up against the guitar as a direct comparison, you may have someone like Steve Vai, Joe Satriani, and Jimi Hendrix that are seen as sort of godfathers of this sort of big, picking, complex guitar mode. But we also get a true understanding of things like three chords and the truth in genres like country music, and the simplicity of how a guitar can be picked up early on with three chords or some punk music or indie music. And we have a full journey from sort of origin and sort of more simplistic tunes, and we can take that as far as we wish into the lead guitar element. Now, the banjo doesn't see as much of this, and it can suffer a little bit in regards to setting really high bars that people struggle to make. And this is where I really like Cripple Creek, because we generally we learn it as a Scruggs style bluegrass tune, but it's one that's actually a lot more achievable earlier on in your playing, and it actually sounds like what it's intended to be at a slower pace, and it sounds like the original as well, comparing this to something like Ground Speed, where there's so much going on in such a particular time that it's quite tricky to, one, actually be able to get this out of your hands, and two, to get it to sound like you maybe want it to, like the original. But with Cripple Creek, it's a shorter tune with a part A and a part B. And it's generally an introduction that starts from a line from part B. And then we have a part A, part B. Part A, part B, round the band, round the houses. And then you can just end it as you wish, usually on a part A. And it has repeated and shared phrasing. So there's phrases in part B that work with part A and vice versa. And it's the last sort of couple of measures of each line you can lift and repurpose into the song. So it's got repeated phrasing within just the part B itself. It's got a sort of alternating roll with a slide that you generally use. And this gives you the ability to learn it in pockets. And so it's really quite we'll say, a more achievable to get in our hands and our memories sort of tune. And it can really form one of our first songs that we play away from tab sheets and sheet music and get to have that feel of the banjo whilst getting that cognitive sort of response back from it, where we feel like, oh, I'm making banjo music now, I'm playing bluegrass or something like that. And it works really well for that. And it's also brilliant for practicing our ornamentation. So it's full of slides and pull-offs and hammer-ons, and it can be done in all the different timings of the note, whether it's done over a quarter, eighth, or 16th note. And you can choose and flavor this in different ways. It links techniques together in measures to create more complex licks and that are usable in other songs that you will come across. And it uses flattened thirds to give us blues notes and that bluegrass feeling to it. Or you can stay in the major key and it still sounds like a driven version of the song. And I guess, summarizing, it gives us a lot back in a short, more achievable song. And it's a pretty essential tune when you're wanting to play out and about. And whether you're in jam sessions or pub groups or in a family and with some friends, it's an absolute standard that people generally know. And it's probably going to grace the floor of most sessions and when you have it under your belt. Or if it's one that you feel confident with and comfortable with, you can bring it to a session and there's only a handful of chords behind it and your friends will be able to pick it up really quickly too. So this takes us near to the end now of the history and the mystery of Cripple Creek. And we have such an amazing history with this. If you think, again, it's around, it could be 200 years old, right? And it covers the American prospecting era. The lyrics are fanciful and joyous about that resilience of the time, trying to make some fun of what's going on. But it's also built through touring musicians and families that will travel from county to state, passing songs back and forth. And you get different lyrical versions as well. And this shared melody that lasts between it takes different journeys depending on different areas that you can sort of see this in. And if you check out 2 or 3 versions of Cripple Creek, you'll come across variants of these lyrics. It covers this sort of Americana Appalachian sort of conjuring of an image in our mind. And then it hits the sort of commercial production area. And actually it throws us in a completely different way, where it's an African-American musician that's generally around this one-man blues sort of band that he's doing. And that's the first commercial release of what we know to be, in essence, some white bluegrass dude's tune. So that even predates Scruggs by, as we saw earlier, a good 36 years. And then in the 60s, that's where we get our Scruggs version. And suddenly, the guy that has sort of brought to the fore this bluegrass style and has his own Scruggs style that we know it as, that really influences so much of what we play today. There's his distinct style and storytelling with it. And then over those years, it stood the test of time all the way through to different jam sessions wherever you go, to different touring bands, to every sort of banjo lesson that you're going to get across the planet at some point is probably going to feature it. And this rite of passage is a song that then can fall in all of our hands. I guess some songs become famous because they're complex, and others become timeless because they're so popular and catchy. And Cripple Creek has welcomed beginners for generations, and it's challenged professionals for a lifetime, and it's connected fiddle players, banjo players, singers, kazoo players, as we found out today, and audiences across the US and then the globe for so long now. And while nobody really owns a traditional tune, Earl Scruggs gave this one a voice that echoes through the bluegrass festivals and jam sessions and front porches and lessons and picking with friends. And the next time you hear those opening notes of Cripple Creek, remember this, think about this, and enjoy this. You're playing and you're listening to so much more than just a tune. You're actually hearing a little piece of musical history, and you're adding your part of that continued story of Cripple Creek, because through our voices is how this will then continue to be around for people in the future, and then take its own further journey in different stylistic ways. So, this is the history and mystery of Cripple Creek, one of the all-time essential banjo songs that we have. And if you want to learn how to play Cripple Creek, check out the links in the description that will take you to the video lesson on YouTube or Patreon, and you can learn how to play this song there. And check out the other links, help yourself to the free tab that's available for this, and then check out the tab which are the 3 building blocks of Cripple Creek, taking it way through from early achievable rolled patterns to then the ornamentation that's involved as well. And the Earl Scruggs version that's there too, where you can play the section that is played as Earl Scruggs did on his recording. And maybe there's also in there some banjo backup for you that you can play along to a jam to others if you're a little unsure how to do that yourself. So, come and support the channel over those. And remember to follow the Happy Picking podcast wherever you get your podcasts, whether you're on Spotify or Amazon or whatever. And join me over on the YouTube page for more lessons and for more content over there. And please support the channel wherever you can, whether it's Patreon or Ko-Fi. All the support and anything that you can give helps me to create and bring to you more banjo content. So, as always, thank you so much for joining me today. And as always, happy picking.